Look at this, you desecrated a grave. Mr. Whitfield, construction is approved. Approved. This is sacred ground. The board has made its decision. I remember the exact moment everything broke. The morning silence, the unnatural stillness in the air, and the way my boots sank into soil that should never have been disturbed. My name is Garrison Whitfield. I'm 42 years old, and I've lived in this community long enough to know every inch of it. But nothing prepared me for what I saw that day. 12 graves, 12, belonging to families whose names had been part of this land for generations, were gone, not relocated, not honored, destroyed, bulldozed into the ground like they meant nothing. I stood there frozen, staring at shattered headstones half buried in fresh dirt, splintered wood from caskets exposed to the open air, entire tracks running straight through what used to be sacred ground. This wasn't neglect, this was deliberate. The kind of deliberate that only comes from people who think they're untouchable. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. The HOA had been pushing their expansion project for months, turning more land into a luxury golf extension, for people who cared more about their tea times than history. I warned them, others warned them. But warnings don't matter when profit is louder than conscience. My fists clenched so tight, my knuckles burned, and I felt something shift inside me. Something that wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. Not ever. Because those graves weren't just markers in the ground. They were family stories. Legacies, and someone had decided those didn't matter. That was their first mistake. I didn't wait. I didn't calm down. I walked straight into the HOA office, like a man who had already made up his mind. Because I had. The building itself was everything you'd expect. Polished floors, quiet air conditioning. Walls lined with smiling photos of community improvements. It made me sick, and sitting at the center of it all was Evelyn Cross. The woman who ran this place like she owned not just the land, but the people on it. She didn't even flinch when I slammed my hand on her desk and demanded an explanation. That told me everything I needed to know. She was prepared, calm, calculated. She spoke in that smooth, practiced tone about approved zoning changes and relocation efforts. But I had just come from the site. There was no relocation. There was destruction. I could see it in her eyes, though just for a second. That flicker of irritation that someone had the nerve to challenge her. The rest of the board stood behind her, silent, like shadows backing a queen who had never been told no. Residents lingered nearby, pretending not to listen, but I could feel their attention locked onto every word I told her. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She told me everything had been done legally. That word legally echoed in my head, like a threat because I knew what it meant. Paperwork buried somewhere. Signatures obtained under pressure. Truth twisted into something acceptable. But I also knew something else. Legal didn't mean right and right now. I wasn't interested in playing by their rules anymore. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't every time I closed my eyes. I saw a broken stone and open earth where there should have been peace. So I did what I do best. I started digging. Just not with a shovel old property records. Archived maps, legal filings. Anything I could get my hands on. And piece by piece, the truth started to surface. The land those graves sat on had protections. Old ones. Buried deep in documents most people would never think to check. Protections that required consent from living descendants before anything could be altered. Consent that had never been properly given. What Evelyn Cross called legal was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. Loopholes, rushed approvals, and signatures that didn't hold up under scrutiny. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't just negligence. It was intentional, strategic. They had counted on no one looking closely enough to challenge them. But they miscalculated because I wasn't just angry anymore. I was focused. Every document I found felt like another brick in something bigger. Something solid enough to push back against everything they'd built. Rain tapped against the windows as I spread papers across my desk. Connecting timelines, marking inconsistencies. Building a case that wasn't just emotional. It was undeniable, And for the first time since that morning, I felt something different, not just anger control. The day everything turned was the day they realized I wasn't bluffing. Legal notices went out fast. Faster than they expected. Not threats, not warnings, action. The same system they hid behind was now working against them. Properties tied to the HOA's fraudulent expansion were suddenly under scrutiny, and where there were violations, there were consequences. Evictions weren't personal. They were procedural, but that didn't make them any less powerful. Families stood outside homes they thought were secure, confusion and anger written across their faces. I didn't enjoy it, that's the truth. No one talks about this wasn't revenge. It was correction and standing there, holding documents that carried more weight than any argument. I could see the shift happening in real time. Evelyn Cross wasn't calm anymore. The control she wore like armor had cracked, replaced with something closer to disbelief. She never thought anyone would push back this hard. The community that once stood quietly behind her was now divided. Some angry, some questioning. Some finally seeing what had been hidden in plain sight. Power doesn't disappear overnight, but it does weaken when it's exposed. And I made sure there was nowhere left for it to hide. In the end, it wasn't about winning. It was about restoring something that should have never been taken. The graves were rebuilt properly, respectfully, with every name restored, and every stone set the way it should have been from the beginning. I stood there as the sun dipped low, casting a warm light across ground that finally felt still again. The golf course still existed, but not where it didn't belong. Boundaries had been redrawn, not just on land, but in principle. People like Evelyn Cross relied on silence, on compliance, on the idea that no one would challenge them when lines were crossed quietly, but silence only works until someone decides to break it. I didn't set out to become that person, but once I saw what had been done, there was no going back. Standing there, looking at 12 graves that once again meant something, I understood something clearly. Legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you're willing to stand up for while you're still here. And some things are worth everything,